At my grandson's birthday, my son-in-law's mom stood up and said, "Thanks to everyone who's supported us over the years, except for one bitter old woman." Every eye turned straight at me. Her insult cut deep, but I just smiled and replied, "This entire family, including you, is standing here today because of that so-called old woman." After that, I did something that made them all finally show me respect. The sting of betrayal, a cold, sharp blade, cut deeper than any rust on an old clock. It wasn't just my house they wanted to sell, it was my entire existence they were trying to erase, and my own daughter was letting it happen. At 63, a strange thing happened. I began to truly hear mechanical clocks. Not just the ticking, but their very voices. Over decades, you learn to distinguish each small, living mechanism. Edward's pocket watch, my late husband's, always had a special warmth to it. Maybe it was the 25 years it spent against his heart, or the brass case warmed by his body. Or maybe it was simply his watch. I brought the magnifying glass closer, my thin screwdriver poised. It was freezing in my Detroit garage this mid-October, and my fingers trembled slightly. This kind of work, it demands patience. The rust was reaching the balance, but I knew I could scrape it off, carefully. Then my phone vibrated, shattering the silence. My daughter's number, of course. Who else would call on a Wednesday afternoon? "Yes, dear," I sighed, setting down my tools. "Mom, where are you? I've called you 3 times. De'Ara's voice was already tight with annoyance. "I'm at home, working." "Is something wrong?" My garage, you see, it had been my sanctuary for 8 years, ever since Edward died and I sold his old Ford. It was the only place I could truly be Judith Harlow, former industrial automation specialist, not just De'Ara's mom or Finley's grandma. "You promised to help me with Finley's birthday. Did you forget?" I hadn't promised anything of the sort, but arguing with De'Ara was pointless. She simply demanded I come immediately. I meticulously placed the watch parts in a tray, covered my workbench. My tools hung on the wall, each labeled, polished, perfect. Order, precision, consistency, attention to detail. These were the lessons I learned at General Motors for 25 years, setting up robotic systems to tolerances of 1,000th of a millimeter. Now, I applied those same exacting skills to the tiny, intricate worlds of old watches. I threw on a worn jacket and headed for the bus stop. My old Chevrolet had broken down weeks ago, and I couldn't afford the repairs. Asking De'Ara for money would mean another lecture on my financial insolvency. Her house in Grosse Pointe was over an hour away by public transportation, time I could have spent on Edward's clock. On the bus, I pulled out my notebook, sketching calculations. If I skipped buying a new coat this winter, I could afford that precision screwdriver set. De'Ara and Gareth's house, a sprawling 2-story with a manicured lawn, was a world away from my shabby little place. When I reached the porch, the door swung open. De'Ara, impeccable even in her home clothes, handed me the keys. "The movers will be here in half an hour. Make sure they don't scratch the parquet." She gave me a critical look, then added, "I left a dress on the guest bed. You should change." I said nothing. Silence, I'd learned, was my survival strategy in this family. As De'Ara left, I walked through the empty house. It always amazed me how much stuff could fill a home that felt so devoid of actual life. Perfectly arranged furniture, magazines no one read, decorative items no one touched. Upstairs, I peered into Finley's room. He was turning 13, a smart, observant boy with quiet wonder in his eyes, so much like Edward. The room was spotless, far too immaculate for a teenager. Designer wallpaper, a perfectly made bed, shelves of books chosen for image, not interest. I sat on the edge of the bed, remembering how I'd helped him with math. He was quick, but only truly engaged when he could see the practical application. "Grandma, how can you use this for mechanisms?" he'd ask, his eyes lighting up with that familiar spark. Looking around, I noticed a desk drawer slightly ajar. Curiosity tugged. I pulled it open. Notebooks, pencils. Nothing. But something made me look further. Crouching down, I scanned under the bed. Nothing. Then, my hand brushed against something hard behind the bookcase. A small metal cookie tin. Inside, Meticulously organized were tools and parts: a miniature soldering iron, thin screwdrivers, a multimeter, spools of wire, circuit boards. Beneath them, neat diagrams and drawings. I carefully picked up a finished design, an electronic alarm clock on a breadboard, able to play different melodies. Next to it, a simple robot on wheels with a mechanical arm, equipped with sensors to avoid obstacles. Everything was assembled with a clear understanding of basic electronics. I couldn't help but smile. He'd inherited my love for technology. He wasn't just copying, he was modifying, improving. Maybe my stories about industrial robots had struck a chord. The doorbell chimed, pulling me back to reality. I quickly put the tin back and headed downstairs. The movers brought tables and chairs, and the next 2 hours blurred in a flurry of activity. I directed, unpacked, decorated. The professional decorator Diera hired gave me disdainful looks, but I ignored her. Around 5, Diera returned with a huge race car-shaped cake, Gareth trailing behind her. My son-in-law, tall and prematurely gray, always treated me politely but distantly, as if I were some inconvenient antique. Upstairs, a dark blue dress lay on the guest bed, expensive and utterly not my style, with a pair of low-heeled shoes. Diera always dressed me like a mannequin for an exhibition. After changing, I went downstairs. Finley was already there, quietly watching his mother arrange appetizers. "Hello, Grandma," he said, but his smile didn't reach his eyes. "Hello, dear," I hugged him. "Ready for tomorrow?" "Not really," he shrugged. "Mom invited too many people. I don't even know most of them." Later, as I helped set the table, Diera came near, and I seized the moment. "Diera," I began, "I've noticed Finley is really interested in electronics. Maybe we should encourage that hobby." She froze. "What are you talking about?" Her voice tense. "I just think he has a talent for technology, like you did." "Mom, don't start," she interrupted. "Finley needs to focus on his studies and sports. It's important for his future." "Understanding technology can be important for the future," I countered. "The Simmons have different traditions," she snapped. "Gareth wants his son to go to a good school, then to the Ivy League, like his father and grandfather." I fell silent again. When did my daughter become this cold woman who valued status above her own child's happiness? The doorbell rang. The first guests for the pre-party family dinner had arrived. Diera instantly transformed into the perfect hostess, leaving me to finish appetizers in the kitchen. Within 30 minutes, the house was buzzing with Gareth's parents, his sister, Diera's brother, and their families. I tried to be useful, serving drinks, clearing dishes. As usual, no one really noticed me. I was furniture, functional but unremarkable. "Lorraine will be here at 7, I heard Gareth tell Diera in the hallway. I froze. Lorraine. Gareth's mother. I hadn't seen her in years, but her name still sent a tremor through me. My heart hammered. Lorraine Simmons. 20 years ago, she was the head of HR at General Motors. She was the one who signed my termination notice during downsizing, knowing my husband was sick and my daughter was in college. She looked me in the eye and spoke of inevitable cutbacks while other managers received bonuses. Now, she was my grandson's grandmother. Fate, sometimes, plays cruel jokes. I retreated to the furthest corner of the kitchen, pretending to make coffee. After a while, I heard her deep, slightly hoarse voice. Lorraine suggested Diera discuss something important, and they disappeared into Gareth's office. I exhaled. Not today. Please, not today. I wasn't ready to face her. Reaching for cups in the top cupboard, I fumbled, and a porcelain mug crashed, the sound unexpectedly loud. I quickly gathered the pieces, hoping no one noticed. Grandma, you cut yourself. Finley's quiet voice startled me. He stood in the doorway, serious eyes fixed on my finger, where a drop of blood indeed bloomed. It's nothing, sweetie. Just a scratch. Finley came closer, holding out a clean handkerchief. Here, it's clean. I smiled, accepting his help. Thank you. How are you? Enjoying the birthday preparations? He shrugged. It's okay. It's not my birthday. It's their birthday. He nodded towards the living room. You'll be 13 tomorrow, Finley. It's an important day. Yeah, he sighed with unchildlike weariness. Grandma, you found my box, didn't you? I didn't deny it. Yes, I did. You're good at it. The robot design is interesting. Where did you learn to solder? From videos online, he glanced at the door. Don't tell Mom. She thinks it's a waste of time. I won't, I patted his shoulder. But it's not a waste of time, Finley. It's an important skill. Really? His eyes lit up. You used to work with stuff like that, right? Dad mentioned you were an engineer. I was an industrial automation specialist, I corrected. I set up robotic systems at a factory. The principles are the same as in your projects. Precision, consistency, attention to detail. Cool, he exclaimed sincerely. Can you show me sometime how to make a robot's arm more precise? Right now, it often misses when it tries to pick something up. Sure, sweetie, I smiled, if your parents say so. When Finley left, I finished cleaning the shards and leaned against the kitchen table. Maybe all wasn't lost. Maybe there was still a spark in my grandson that Diarra was so diligently trying to extinguish. Muffled voices drifted from Gareth's study. I wasn't going to eavesdrop, but as I passed, I couldn't help but stop. The house is on a nice lot, Lorraine was saying. The developer is offering a great price. It's the perfect location for new townhouses. But it's Mom's house. Diarra's voice sounded uncertain. I can't just sell it. Honey, the house is technically yours. Edward left it to you. And what is your mother doing there? Living alone, spending money on fixing up junk. At her age, it's time to think about something more sensible, like a nursing home with good care. Mom would never agree. Who said you have to ask her? Lorraine's voice hardened. Gareth explained it to your wife. That house is an asset. It's foolish to keep it just out of sentimentality. Diarra, your mother isn't young anymore, Gareth interjected. She's 63. Sooner or later, we'll have to decide how to take care of her. It's better to do it now while she's still relatively healthy. I recoiled from the door, feeling the blood drain from my face. They wanted to sell my house. The house where I'd lived for 40 years, where Diarra grew up, where Edward died, where every corner held a memory. And my daughter wasn't even trying to object. To them, I was already written off. An old woman to be sent to a nursing home. I hurried to the kitchen, my hands trembling. I glanced at the clock. It was 7:15. Lorraine would be here soon, and I would have to smile. Pretend I didn't know she was preparing another blow for me. The doorbell rang again. More guests? I took a deep breath, trying to compose myself. After all, it was Finley's birthday tomorrow. And no matter what happened, I wasn't going to ruin my grandson's birthday. Finley's birthday was unusually sunny for October in Detroit. I'd spent the night in Diarra's guest room, as preparations had gone late. Lying in bed, I listened to the quiet house. A difficult day lay ahead, not just the exhausting party, but the looming presence of Lorraine. The overheard conversation about selling my house gnawed at me, poisoning every thought. On the nightstand, my gift for Finley, Edward's restored pocket watch. 3 months of painstaking work, searching for parts, cleaning, polishing, tuning. I had poured not only my time and skill into it, but a piece of my soul. I hoped Finley would appreciate this symbol of the bond between generations. At 7, I went to the kitchen for breakfast, but Diarra was already there, directing 2 women from the catering service. Mom, you're up, she said, glancing at me. Coffee's in the pot. Katerina and Jean will take care of breakfast and lunch, so you don't have to cook. I could make Finley's favorite pancakes, I offered. Today is a special day. We've planned a Belgian menu, dear. Sugar head waffles, fresh berries. Everything's already been ordered. I nodded, stepping back towards the coffee maker. Again, my help was unnecessary. I had grown accustomed to this. By 9, the house was a battlefield, decorators, florists, waiters, a DJ stage in the backyard. It looked more like a society reception than a 13th birthday party. Finley came down at 9, still sleepy and subdued. Happy birthday, dear, I hugged him, feeling him awkwardly hug me back. Thanks, Grandma, he smiled weakly. Finley. Diarra rushed in, phone in hand. Finally. You have 40 minutes for breakfast. Then you need to get ready. The photographer will be here at 11:30 for family pictures before the guests arrive. Okay, Mom, he said obediently, sitting at the table where a plate of perfectly arranged waffles awaited him. I sat next to him when Diarra left. "How are you feeling on such an important day?" I asked, trying to sound cheerful. Finley shrugged. "I don't know. It's weird, all this." He gestured around the room. "It's not really what I wanted." "What would you like?" He thought. "Maybe just go somewhere with a few friends, to a science museum or a robotics exhibition." "Something like that." I nodded understandingly. It was a familiar story. Diarra was making the holiday for herself, not her son. Just like Edward had insisted she study engineering, despite her leaning towards humanities, she was repeating the same mistake with her own child. "I have something for you," I said quietly, glancing at the door. "But I'd like to give it to you before the official part starts." "What is it?" His eyes lit up. "You'll see," I winked. "Find me before the guests arrive." Finley smiled, the first real smile of the morning. But the moment was interrupted as Diarra returned, reminding him of the importance of impressing guests, especially his father's colleagues. By 11, the house was utterly transformed. Blue and silver balloons, garlands, flowers, flawless, sterile, like a magazine spread. A three-tiered cake with a tennis player figurine sat on the living room table, a tribute to the hobby Gareth tried to instill. I tried to help, but constantly felt in the way. My embroidered napkins didn't match the color scheme. At 11, amidst the peak of the chaos, Finley found me in a quiet kitchen corner. "Grandma, did you want to show me something?" His voice was curious. I pulled a small box, wrapped in plain blue paper, from my pocket. "Happy birthday, Finley. This belonged to your grandfather." He carefully unwrapped it, his eyes widening at the antique pocket watch with its open mechanism. "Is this a real mechanical watch?" He held it reverently, examining the intricate gears. "Yes," I smiled at his delighted face. "Your grandfather wore it every day. I restored it for you." "You did this yourself?" He looked at me. "Of course. Remember I told you I used to work with mechanisms? It's the same principle, only in miniature." Finley gently stroked the golden surface. "It's alive, not like those digital things." "Exactly," I nodded. "They have a soul and a history." He looked up, his eyes filled with such sincere gratitude that my heart ached. "Thank you, Grandma. This is the best gift ever." We heard Diarra's footsteps, and Finley quickly tucked the watch into his pocket. "There you are," she appeared in the doorway. "Finley, the photographer is waiting. Please change into the blue suit. Guests will start arriving in an hour." When Finley left, Diarra turned to me. "Mom, can you check if everything's okay with the drinks? I'm worried we didn't order enough non-alcoholic options." I nodded, knowing it was just something to keep me busy. The first guests arrived at 1, classmates, colleagues, tennis club friends. Gareth and Diarra greeted them, Finley standing nearby, stiffly smiling and shaking hands. I kept to myself, helping waiters. At 2, Lorraine arrived, radiating that familiar air of superiority. Impeccably dressed, perfect hair, exuding confidence. Gareth lit up, while Diarra visibly tensed, still trying to impress her mother-in-law. Lorraine gave me a barely perceptible nod, then headed straight for Finley. "My dear grandson," she opened her arms. 13 is a special age. You're becoming a real man." Finley hugged her, his shoulders tensing at the formal contact. "Thank you, Grandma Lorraine," he smiled politely. "I have a special gift for you." She motioned to an assistant, who carried a silver-wrapped box with a monogram. Finley opened it, his eyes widening slightly. Inside was an expensive Swiss watch in a leather case. Massive, shiny, more suited to a businessman than a 13-year-old. "It's a Simmons tradition," Lorraine explained, putting the watch on his wrist. "Every man in our family gets a watch like this when he turns 13. Your father wore one just like it." It looked bulky on Finley's thin wrist, but he thanked her politely. "Now you're a real Simmons," she said, patting his shoulder. I saw Finley's hand involuntarily reach for his pocket, where Edward's watch lay. He glanced at me, and I smiled encouragingly. Let him have both gifts, symbols of two different worlds from which he could choose his own path. The celebration continued. Children played, adults socialized. Finley moved from group to group, politely accepting congratulations. I watched him from a distance, seeing his smile grow more forced with each passing hour. At 5, it was time for dinner. I was seated at the far end next to some distant relative, while Finley took the center seat between his father and Lorraine. De'Ara sat next to Gareth, radiating the tense happiness of a hostess of a perfect party. The dinner was exquisite, several courses served by white-gloved waiters. I barely touched my food, watching Finley. He chatted politely, but his gaze often lingered on me, as if seeking support. After dessert, Gareth rose. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to propose a toast to our birthday boy. Finley, today you are turning 13, an important milestone. You are growing up to be a true Simmons, determined, talented, and a worthy successor to our family tradition." I couldn't help but wince. Gareth seemed completely unaware of his son's real interests, his soul. "Your success in tennis, your grades in school, everything indicates you are on the right path. I am proud of you and confident you will attend a reputable university, just like all the Simmons before you. Here's to you, son." Everyone raised their glasses. Finley sat with a forced smile, his eyes meeting mine across the table for a moment. I gave him an encouraging smile. Then De'Ara spoke about her pride, his achievements, what a wonderful person he was becoming. Not a word about his real interests, his talent for technology, his dreams. When De'Ara finished, it was Lorraine's turn. She rose majestically, her well-modulated voice filling the room. "Dear friends, today we celebrate an important event, the 13th birthday of my grandson, Finley Edward Simmons." She placed a hand on his shoulder, and he tensed. 13 is the age when a boy begins to become a man. It is when character, ambitions, and ideas about the future are formed. And I want to say that Finley is growing up to be exactly the kind of person the heir to the Simmons family should be. She paused, glancing around, her gaze lingering on me, something cold flashing in her eyes. I cringed. I want to thank everyone who made this possible. Gareth and De'Ara, who are raising their son with such care and attention. The teachers, coaches, mentors who help him grow and develop. Everyone who has been with us all these years. She paused again, and something in her tone made me wary. "Except for one woman," Lorraine said quietly. But it rang out like a gunshot. "Who is trying to drag my grandson back into the past, instilling in him an interest in crafts instead of a real education, to screwdrivers and soldering irons instead of books and sports?" A whisper ran through the room. Guests exchanged awkward glances. De'Ara froze, staring at her plate. Gareth looked surprised, but not upset. And Finley? Finley stared at me with wide eyes, filled with horror and shame. I felt the blood rush to my face. All these years of silence, concessions, compromises, and now, publicly, at my grandson's birthday party, I was being portrayed as the family enemy. But that doesn't matter, Lorraine continued with a slight smile. What matters is that Finley knows who his real family is and where his future lies. To you, dear grandson. She raised her glass. Most guests followed, though some looked embarrassed. I sat motionless, feeling something inside me break completely. The thin thread of respect that held my relationship with this family together was severed. Dinner continued, the conversation gradually returning to normal. No one mentioned Lorraine's cruel toast, though I felt curious glances. De'Ara didn't come over, didn't stand up for me, didn't say a word. She just kept smiling, playing the perfect hostess. When the cake was brought out, everyone gathered around Finley to sing. I stood aside, a ghost at this celebration. Finley blew out the candles, and his gaze met mine. There was so much pain and apology in his eyes that my heart ached. After the cake, guests began to leave. I mechanically performed my duties. But inside, a decision solidified. I could no longer be a shadow. When the last guest left, I went upstairs, gathered my few belongings, then descended. De'Ara and Gareth were in the living room with Lorraine. Finley sat on the sofa, looking at gifts with a distant expression. I walked to the hall table where my keys to their house lay. The same keys De'Ara had given me just in case, which I'd always been reluctant to use, feeling like an intruder. The clink of metal against glass made everyone turn. I stood in the doorway, straight as a board, looking Lorraine straight in the eye for the first time in years. "Judith, what are you doing?" De'Ara frowned, looking at the keys. "I'm leaving," my voice sounded calm, though inside I trembled. "Thank you for your hospitality." "Don't be silly, Mom." De'Ara rolled her eyes. "It's late." "And what?" I interrupted my daughter for the first time. "Are you afraid your old mother won't make it home?" "Don't worry, I'll manage." "I've managed all my life." Lorraine watched with mild interest, as if it were a TV drama. Gareth looked annoyed. "Grandma," Finley got up, his voice alarmed. "Please stay. It's dark." "It's all right, dear," I smiled at him. "Happy birthday again. I hope you continue to do what you really enjoy, regardless of what others say." I turned and headed for the door, feeling their eyes on me. No one tried to stop me. Even De'Ara just said, "Mom, you're being unreasonable. We'll talk tomorrow when you've calmed down." I didn't answer. I opened the door and stepped out into the cool October evening. A light rain was falling. I hadn't brought an umbrella, but right now, that seemed insignificant. For the first time in many years, I felt free. Humiliated, broken, but free. The rain grew heavier, fine drops turning into heavy streams. I walked with my head down, ignoring my wet clothes. The October cold penetrated to my bones, but inside me burned a fire of humiliation and anger. For 23 years, I had been a shadow. 23 years of conforming, giving in, keeping quiet. And this was the result. Public humiliation in front of dozens of strangers, and my own daughter said nothing, didn't stand up for me. Where did I go wrong? When did De'Ara turn from a curious little girl who collected radios with her father into this cold woman who valued status more than her own mother? Maybe I worked too much or wasn't strict enough. Or was it because Edward and I always lived modestly, without the luxury she saw in her wealthy classmates' homes? I walked through the deserted streets of Grosse Pointe, a neighborhood where I never felt at home. It was 2 kilometers to the bus stop, then another hour to my old house in the working-class neighborhood. But now that distance seemed insignificant compared to the chasm that had formed between me and my family. The rain washed away the lines on the sidewalk, turning them into gray streams. Lorraine's words echoed in my head with each step, except for one woman. Except for one woman. How dare she? What right did she have to judge my relationship with my grandson, my attempts to support his true interests? This was the same Lorraine who had signed my dismissal 20 years ago, knowing Edward was ill and De'Ara was in college. And now she was trying to erase me again, this time from my grandson's life. I was so lost in thought that I didn't immediately hear the quick footsteps behind me. Only when they were almost upon me did I turn, freezing in surprise. Finley was running through the rain, soaked to the skin, wearing only the blue suit from the party. His hair was plastered to his forehead, and his large, serious eyes looked at me with anxiety and determination. "Grandma." He stopped, breathing heavily. "Finley." I couldn't believe my eyes. "What are you doing here? You're soaking wet." He caught his breath. "I left to come find you." "But your mom, your birthday. What does it matter?" He shrugged, and there was so much adult weariness in that gesture, my heart sank. "It's not my holiday." It never was. I looked at him, not knowing what to say. A 13-year-old boy stood in front of me in the pouring rain, determined and vulnerable. "You can't just leave like this," I finally said. "Your parents will be worried." "They don't care," he said, his voice devoid of childish resentment, merely stating a fact. "They didn't even notice I left." Mom and Dad were discussing some deal with their guests, and Grandma Lorraine was telling everyone what a wonderful university awaited me in 5 years. The rain intensified. We stood under a street light, 2 lonely figures in a deserted, expensive neighborhood. "We need to find shelter," I said, looking around. "You're shaking." A couple of blocks away was an old bus stop with a shelter. I took Finley by the hand, and we hurried there, jumping over puddles. Under the thin roof of the bus stop, it was a little drier. I took off my scarf and tried to wipe his wet hair. "Why did you follow me?" I asked when we'd both caught our breath. Finley pulled something from his wet jacket pocket and held it out. "Edward's pocket watch." I gasped, imagining the water damage. "I couldn't leave them there," he said quietly. "They wouldn't understand how special they are." "Finley." "Grandma, I can't stay there anymore," he blurted out. "They're always telling me who I'm supposed to be. Tennis, a prestigious school, the right friends, the right hobbies. No one asks what I want." His voice trembled, but not from the cold. "What do you want, Finley?" He thought for a moment. "I want to create things like you, like the grandfather you told me about. I want to understand how things work, not just use them." But when I try to talk to Mom about it, she just sighs and reminds me about tennis practice or French class. I nodded, recognizing echoes of my own story. My father hadn't understood my interest in mechanics either, thinking it inappropriate for a girl. It took me years to defend my path. "What about your father?" I asked. "Have you tried talking to him?" Finley shrugged. "He's always busy. When he's home, he's usually working or on the phone. And if we do have time, he talks about the future, the family business, the Simmons traditions. As if I've already decided I want to be an exact copy of my father and grandfather." The rain drummed on the roof, creating a strange intimacy. "Grandma," he looked me straight in the eye. "What Grandma Lorraine said at the table, that was awful. I saw how much it hurt you, and no one stood up for you, not even Mom." "Adult relationships are complicated, Finley," I said, trying to find words that weren't excuses. "Sometimes people make choices that are hard for others to understand." "That's not right," he said stubbornly. "They treat you like a piece of furniture, something they can move around or throw away when they don't need it anymore." His insight struck me. This boy saw what many adults chose not to. "You observe a lot, don't you?" I asked quietly. "When you're a quiet kid, people often forget you're in the room." He smiled faintly. "I heard them talking about selling your house, as if it were just property, not a place where you live." I felt a lump rise in my throat. All these years, I thought I was protecting Finley by shielding him from adult complexities, but he had seen and understood everything. "I'm sorry you had to hear that," I said. "Children shouldn't have to worry about things like that." "I'm 13, Grandma," he said, straightening up, suddenly looking older than his years. "I'm not a little kid, and I see how you're being treated. It's not fair." The rain eased to a drizzle. "What are you going to do now?" Finley asked. "Go home," I shrugged. "What else can I do? Can I come with you?" Hope shone in his voice. "Just for tonight?" "I don't want to go back there." I thought about it. Taking a child without permission was wrong. But sending him back to a home where his true self was being erased felt even more wrong. "Your parents will be worried," I said, though I wasn't sure that was true. "They didn't even notice I left," Finley repeated. "Please, Grandma, just for today." "I promise I'll go back tomorrow." His eyes, so similar to Edward's, implored me. I gave in. "All right, but we'll call your parents in the morning and you'll go home." He nodded, his face lighting up. "Thank you. I just can't see them all today, especially Grandma Lorraine with her talk about real Simmonses." We stepped out from under the shelter. The rain had almost stopped, but the air was damp and cold. Finley shivered in his wet suit. "It's a few blocks to the bus stop," I said. "You'll freeze." "I'm fine," he said bravely, though his lips were blue. "Stay here," I said, spotting a phone booth. "I'll call a taxi." 15 minutes later, we were in the warm interior of an old Ford. The driver, an elderly man, gave us a surprised look but said nothing. A wet old woman and a boy in a ruined suit were probably not his strangest passengers. On the way, Finley pressed against me, shivering. I put my arms around his shoulders, feeling his body gradually relax. We were silent, lost in thought. "I've never been to your house," Finley said suddenly. It was true. Deira always insisted family gatherings be at their spacious, immaculate home. My modest house, in an old working-class neighborhood, was a symbol of the past she was so eager to distance herself from. "It's not as nice as yours," I warned. "And a little messy. I wasn't expecting guests." "I don't care," he shrugged. "I'm sure it's more interesting than our spotless house where you can't even sit on the living room sofa because it's not for everyday use." There was such bitterness in his voice that I couldn't help but smile, recognizing my own thoughts. Finley was much more like me than his parents, and that both delighted and frightened me. The taxi stopped in front of my house, a small, single-story building with peeling paint and an old but well-kept garden. I paid the driver, mentally calculating the hit to my meager budget. But it didn't matter now. We climbed the steps, and I took out my keys. Real keys to a real house, not the symbolic set I'd left on Diarra's hall table. The door creaked open, letting us into the dark hallway. "Wait a second," I said, fumbling for the light switch. A dim light revealed modest furnishings, old furniture, a worn carpet, and photographs in simple frames. But it was clean and cozy. A real home, not a showroom. "We need to dry off and warm up," I said, helping Finley with his wet jacket. "I have some of your grandfather's old clothes. They'll be a little big, but better than nothing." I led him to the bathroom, then found dry clothes for us both. In the closet, some of Edward's things were still stored: an old sweater, a flannel shirt, and sweatpants that, with a tight belt, would fit the skinny Finley just fine. When we were both changed and warm, I made hot tea and sandwiches. We sat in the kitchen, Finley looking around with interest. "You have so many interesting things," he said, gazing at shelves filled with old mechanisms, tools, and books. "There's a sense of life here." "They're just old things," I shrugged. "Most people would call them junk." "They're not junk," he shook his head. "Everything has a story, right? Like your grandfather's watch." "Yes," I smiled, touched by his understanding. "Everything means something or reminds you of someone." Finley took the watch from his pocket. It had miraculously survived the rain. "Tell me about your grandfather," he asked, carefully placing the watch between us. "What was he like?" "My mother hardly ever talks about him." And I began to tell him how Edward and I met at the factory. He an experienced engineer, I a young automation specialist. How he supported my ambitions when women were rarely taken seriously in technical professions. How we built this house together, room by room, saving every dollar. How Diarra was born, and how Edward taught her to disassemble and reassemble radios, hoping she'd follow in his footsteps. Finley listened, holding his breath, absorbing every detail about the family he knew so little about. "Why did Mom lose interest in technology?" he asked when I paused. "You said she loved building radios with Grandpa." I sighed, searching for words. In high school, Diarra became friends with girls from wealthy families. They lived a completely different life. Expensive cars, travel, fashionable clothes. I think she became ashamed of our simple home, of her father getting his hands dirty with machine oil. She began to dream of a different life, and then she met Gareth in college. She found her ticket to that world. Finley finished quietly. And since then, she's been trying to prove that she deserves to be there. I was struck by his insight. "Yes, that's probably true. But you know, Finley, I don't blame her. Everyone has the right to choose their own path. It's just that sometimes people forget where they came from and who helped them along the way." We sat in silence, broken only by the ticking of the old clock and the subsiding rain. In that moment, a connection formed between us, deeper than words, an understanding between two people who saw the world in a similar way despite the age difference. "Grandma," Finley said suddenly, looking at me with serious eyes. "I want to stay with you, not just for today. I want to live here with you." His words took me by surprise. "Finley, that's impossible. Your parents would never agree. And this is your family. Your home." "It's not a home," he shook his head. "It's a place where I live, but I've never really felt at home there. Not like I do here with you in just one evening." His words touched me deeply, but I knew I couldn't encourage such thoughts. "Listen, you're upset right now. It's been a hard day for all of us. Let's talk about it tomorrow with a clear head." Finley looked disappointed but nodded. "Okay, but I won't change my mind." "It's late." I glanced at the clock. "You need to get some rest. I'll make up the guest room for you." As I made up the bed in the small room that had once belonged to Diarra, I thought about Finley's words. Part of me was touched by his desire to stay, but another part understood how unrealistic it was. Diarra and Gareth would never allow their son to live with his grandmother in an old working-class neighborhood, far from prestigious schools and the right friends. When I returned to the kitchen, Finley was standing at the window, looking out at the wet street, wearing Edward's too big sweater. He looked touching and vulnerable. "Come on," I called. "I'll show you where you'll be sleeping." He turned, holding Edward's pocket watch. It stopped ticking, probably because of the rain. "It's okay," I said, walking over and taking the watch. "I'll take it apart and dry it out tomorrow. The mechanism shouldn't be damaged." "Do you really think you can fix it?" Hope was in his voice. Of course, I smiled. I've fixed hundreds of mechanisms more complicated than this in my life. Everything can be fixed if you know how the system works and have the right tools. Finley nodded, admiration flashing in his eyes. "Will you teach me?" "I'd be happy to," I said, putting my hand on his shoulder. "Now it's time to sleep. Tomorrow will be a difficult day." After showing Finley to the guest room, I returned to the kitchen. Sitting at the table with a cup of cold tea, I thought about the past few hours. Lorraine's speech, my departure, Finley following me. I knew I would face consequences in the morning. Deira and Gareth must have discovered his disappearance and were probably frantic. I should call them. But part of me, the part that still ached from the public humiliation, wanted them to feel at least a fraction of the anxiety I had lived with. It was wrong. I knew that. But today, just today, I allowed myself to be less than perfect as a grandmother and mother. Just for one night. In the morning, I would make the right call. I walked to the window, looking at the night street. The rain had stopped, and streetlights and stars reflected in puddles. Somewhere out there, in a wealthy neighborhood, my daughter was probably beginning to understand that not everything can be controlled. That sometimes people, even those closest, make unexpected choices. I returned to the table, picked up Edward's watch. I held it to my ear. Silence. But I knew the mechanism inside was still alive, just in need of care and attention, just like our family. I placed the watch carefully and went to bed. Tomorrow would be a new day and perhaps the beginning of something new in our relationship. I didn't know what the future would bring, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I had a voice, a choice, and a little boy who understood me better than anyone else. Morning came too quickly. I woke to rain drumming on the roof, normal for Detroit. The events of yesterday seemed unreal, like a bad dream. Finley. I sat up abruptly. His parents were probably going crazy. No, that was impossible. They had to have noticed. It was 7. Time to call my daughter. I took out my phone, finger hovering over the buttons. What would I say? "Hi, Deira. Your son is with me. Don't worry." After I left, after I took a 13-year-old child without permission, the phone rang before I could dial. It was Deira. I took a deep breath. "Mom," her voice was tense. "Is Finley with you?" "Yes, I didn't see the point in denying it. He came to pick me up last night. He got soaked. I couldn't send him back in that state." "And you didn't think to call?" Her voice was boiling with rage. "We've been freaking out all night. Gareth drove around the whole neighborhood. We called his friends, the police." "I was going to call in the morning," I replied, trying to sound calm. Finley was upset. He needed some time. "Upset?" Deira raised her voice. "What did you say to him?" "He's never run away before." "I didn't say anything to him," I said, starting to get angry myself. "Maybe you should ask yourself why your son chose to leave a party and go after his inappropriate grandmother." Silence. Then Deira spoke, calmer. "We're on our way. I'll be there in 30 minutes. She hung up. I sighed and went to wake Finley. He was curled up under the covers, looking much younger than 13. I felt bad waking him, but I had to get him ready. "Finley," I said gently, shaking his shoulder. "Wake up, dear. Your parents will be here soon." He opened his eyes, staring blankly, then yesterday's events returned, and he sat up. "Did they call?" he asked sleepily. "Yes, just now. Your mother was very worried." "I doubt it," he shrugged. "She was probably angry that I ruined her perfect holiday." "Finley, don't be like that," I said, sitting beside him. "She's your mother." Of course, she was worried. He looked at me doubtfully, but said nothing. I suggested he wash up and have breakfast. His clothes, dried overnight, lay neatly folded. We ate toast and tea in silence, then heard a car pull up. Finley tensed. I put my hand on his shoulder. "Everything will be fine. Just be honest, okay?" He nodded, but anxiety filled his eyes. The doorbell rang sharply. I went to open it, bracing myself. Deira and Gareth stood on the doorstep. My daughter looked exhausted, pale, red eyes, disheveled hair. Gareth, composed and determined, only his jaw muscles betraying his tension. "Where is he?" De'Ara demanded without greeting. "In the kitchen, having breakfast," I said, stepping aside. They walked past me without a word. I followed them into the kitchen where Finley sat rigidly at the table. "Finley Edward Simmons." De'Ara's voice trembled. "What do you think you're doing?" The boy looked up. "Hi, Mom." "Hi, Mom," she exclaimed, throwing up her hands. "You disappeared on your own birthday without saying a word. Do you have any idea what we went through?" "We called the police, the hospitals. I left a note," Finley said quietly. "On your bed." De'Ara fell silent, digesting this. "We didn't go into your room," she finally said. "We thought you were somewhere in the house or the garden, and when we realized you weren't there." "When did you realize that?" Finley challenged, his voice firm. "An hour? 2. It doesn't matter." Gareth interrupted. "What matters is that you left without permission with a grandmother who didn't even bother to call us. Don't bring Grandma into this." Finley suddenly raised his voice. "It was my decision. I couldn't stay there any longer. Not after what Grandma Lorraine did." De'Ara shot me an accusing look. "What did you tell him?" "She didn't say anything to me." Finley stood up. "I saw everything myself. How Grandma Lorraine humiliated her in front of all the guests. How you sat there and said nothing. How no one stood up for her." A heavy silence fell. De'Ara lowered her eyes, speechless. Gareth shifted, uncomfortable. "Finley, you don't understand adult relationships," he finally said. "Between De'Ara's mother and my mother, it's a complicated story." "I understand enough," the boy said stubbornly. "I understand when someone is treated unfairly, and I don't want to be a part of it." "Enough." De'Ara shook her head. "We'll discuss this at home. Get ready. We're leaving." "I'm not going." Finley crossed his arms. "I want to stay with Grandma." "Don't be silly." Gareth stepped forward. "Your place is at home with us. You have school, practice." "I don't care." Finley's voice trembled. "I hate tennis. I hate the school where all anyone talks about is money and status. I hate being a real Simmons." Gareth looked stunned. De'Ara paled. "Finley, please." She reached for her son. "You're upset, I understand, but this isn't the answer. Let's go home and we'll talk." "There's nothing to talk about." He pulled away. "You never really listen to me. All you care about is what you want." I stood to the side, watching with a heavy heart. I didn't want to cause discord, but I understood Finley's feelings. "Finley," I interjected gently. "Maybe you should listen to your parents. They were worried about you." He looked at me with disappointment. "You too, Grandma?" "I do understand," I said, walking over and putting my hand on his shoulder. "But your place is with them right now. They're your parents, and they love you, even if they don't always show it the way you'd like them to." De'Ara looked at me in surprise, clearly not expecting my support. "Fine," Finley finally said. "I'll go home, but if nothing changes, I'll leave again, and next time you won't find me." "Finley!" De'Ara exclaimed. "I'm serious, Mom." He looked her straight in the eye. "I can't live like this anymore. I'm 13, but I feel like a prisoner in my own home." The tension in the room peaked. Gareth looked angry. De'Ara looked shaken. Finley, determined. "I think we all need to calm down," I said, trying to diffuse the situation. "Finley, go get your things. Your parents and I need to talk." The boy hesitated, then nodded and left. As soon as his footsteps faded, De'Ara turned to me. "How could you, Mom? Take a child without our permission? Do you realize that could be considered kidnapping?" "I didn't take him." I shook my head. "He came to me, soaking wet and upset. What was I supposed to do? Send him back out in the rain?" "You should have called," De'Ara snapped. "Right away." "Yes, I should have," I admitted. "And I'm sorry I didn't. But I'm also sorry about what happened at the party, about your mother-in-law publicly insulting me, and you not saying a word in my defense." De'Ara looked away. "That was inappropriate of her, but you know Lorraine, she's always very direct." "Direct?" I couldn't believe my ears. "De'Ara, she humiliated me in front of all your guests. She basically accused me of being a bad influence on Finley because I encourage his interest in technology." "Isn't that true?" Gareth interjected. You encourage him to do all these crafts when he should be focusing on his studies and sports. Crafts? I looked at my son-in-law in confusion. Finley builds electronic devices, programs, studies mechanics. These aren't crafts. They're things he has a real talent for. He also has a talent for tennis, Gareth said stubbornly. And languages and math, areas that will really help him in the future. And technical creativity won't help him? I shook my head. Look around you, Gareth. We live in a world created by engineers and inventors, people who took apart radios and built robots when they were kids. That's not the point, Diarra interjected. The point is that you're encouraging him to secretly do things we don't approve of. You're undermining our authority, and you're suppressing his personality. I couldn't hold back any longer. You don't see who he really is because you're too busy creating the perfect heir to the Simmons family. Gareth clenched his fists. You have no right to judge how we raise our son. I do, when I see that he's unhappy. I met his gaze without fear. When he's ready to run away from home just to be listened to and understood. A tense silence fell. I could see Diarra struggling, her face shifting between anger, hurt, and doubt. In any case, she finally said, this is our family and our decisions. You can't just take Finley away whenever you feel like it. I'm not going to, I replied. But maybe you should think about why he chose to come with me. Gareth opened his mouth, but at that moment, Finley returned with his backpack. I'm ready, he said quietly. Okay, Diarra smiled tensely. Let's go home. Dad will make your favorite pancakes. I don't want pancakes, Finley shook his head. I need you to listen to me. Really listen. Diarra and Gareth exchanged glances, not knowing what to say. Grandma? Finley turned to me. Can I come over after school? You promised to show me how to fix Grandpa's watch. I looked at Diarra, waiting. She pursed her lips but nodded. I think we can arrange that if you do your homework first. Thanks. Finley hugged me. I'll be there soon. I promise. As they headed for the door, I remembered. Diarra, can I talk to you alone? Just for a minute. She hesitated, then nodded. Gareth, wait with Finley in the car. I'll be right there. When we were alone, I took a deep breath. What I was about to say had been on my mind for a long time. Diarra, I know about your plans to sell my house, I said bluntly. I overheard your conversation with Lorraine. She paled. Mom, it was just a discussion. We haven't decided anything. Listen to me, I interrupted her. This house is technically yours. That's true, but that's only because your father wanted to secure your future. He never imagined you would kick me out of here. No one is going to kick you out, Diarra protested. We just thought that at your age, it would be better at my age. I smiled bitterly. I'm 63, dear, not 93. I'm completely independent and intend to remain so for many years to come. She lowered her eyes. Mom, you have to understand, this neighborhood is becoming less and less safe, and the house needs constant repairs. I can manage, I said firmly. And I will continue to manage. But there's something you don't know. I walked to the sideboard and took out a folder of documents. Remember 3 years ago, when Gareth lost his job because of a company merger? When you almost lost your house because of an unpaid mortgage? Diarra frowned. What does that have to do with anything? We got through it. Gareth got a new job. But it took almost 6 months, I said, opening the folder and taking out a document. During that time, you had to make 3 mortgage payments, each for $5,000. Remember how strangely quickly the bank agreed to restructure the loan? How suddenly they became so understanding? What are you trying to say? Diarra's voice sounded anxious. I paid, I said, handing her the receipts. All $15,000. My retirement savings. Diarra took the documents with trembling hands. But how? Why didn't you say anything? Because I knew Gareth wouldn't accept help from me, I shrugged. His pride wouldn't allow it. And you? You would have put his feelings above the safety of your family. So, I made a deal with the bank directly. Mom, Diarra stared at me with wide eyes. I didn't know. Of course you didn't, I took the receipts back. I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty. I'm saying this so you understand. I've always done everything I could for you and your family, and I'll continue to do so. But I won't let them evict me from my own home and send me to a nursing home like some useless thing. Diarra stood there, shaken, unable to find words. I could see different emotions fighting in her eyes: surprise, shame, gratitude, confusion. I I need to think, she finally said. This is too much to take in. Of course, I nodded. Think about it. And talk to your son. Really talk to him. Listen to him. He's a wonderful boy, Diarra. And he's so much like your father, even though you may not see it. She nodded, still unable to meet my gaze. I'll try. And thank you for not sending him back out in the rain. He's my grandson, I said simply. And your son. We both want what's best for him. We just see it differently. Diarra finally looked up. Maybe you're right. We have a lot to talk about, all of us. She turned to leave, but I stopped her. And Diarra, Finley was serious about leaving again if nothing changed. Don't underestimate his determination. He takes after Edward in that way, too. I know, she replied quietly. I saw it in his eyes. When the door closed, I sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. The last day had drained all my strength. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a strange sense of relief. The truth I had kept inside me for so long had finally been spoken, and maybe something was starting to change in our family. I walked to the window and saw Diarra getting into the car. Finley was in the back seat, looking in my direction. I waved, and he waved back, smiling faintly. Something about that smile, that simple gesture, gave me hope. The car drove away, and I was left alone in the quiet house, full of memories. But now the silence didn't seem so oppressive. Maybe soon there would be a young voice asking questions about mechanisms and electronics again. Maybe we really could fix not only Edward's old clock, but our relationship as well. November in Detroit was unusually cold. 3 weeks had passed since Finley left with me on his birthday. 3 weeks of gradual but noticeable changes. The first few days after my conversation with Diarra were filled with awkward silence. She called, dryly and formally, letting me know when Finley could come over and clearly stating when he needed to be sent home. I didn't press, understanding she needed time to process. Finley came 3 times a week after school. We spent hours in the garage working on Edward's clock. I showed him how to disassemble, clean each part, oil the gears. He was a capable student, attentive, careful, with a natural understanding of mechanics. "Grandma, look," he exclaimed one day, when the pendulum swung again. "It's alive." His eyes burned with the same fire I'd seen in Edward's when he fixed something complicated. Not just pride, but genuine joy at contact with engineering marvel. On the 3rd Thursday in November, as we finished the clock, I felt a strange heaviness in my chest. At first, I dismissed it. The weather was changing my age. But by evening, the pain intensified, radiating to my left arm and jaw. "Grandma, you look pale," Finley remarked. "Are you feeling okay?" "Just tired," I tried to smile, but it was a grimace. "Maybe I should lie down." I got up, immediately staggered. The room spun and the pain became unbearable. The last thing I remembered before losing consciousness was Finley's frightened face and his cry, "Grandma." I woke in the hospital. White ceiling, beeping machines, antiseptic smell. I tried to move, but my body felt foreign. "Mom?" Diarra's voice. "Are you awake?" "Thank God." I turned my head. My daughter sat by the bed, exhausted. Red eyes, pale face, disheveled hair. "What happened?" My voice was hoarse. "You had a heart attack." Diarra took my hand. "Quite a serious one." If it weren't for Finley, he reacted so quickly. He called an ambulance and called us. "The doctors say he saved your life." I tried to comprehend. A heart attack. At 63. Like Edward, only he couldn't be saved. "How long have I been here?" 2 days. Diarra squeezed my hand. "You were unconscious. The doctors were worried, but now everything should be fine. You had surgery and a stent put in." I nodded. "Finley, is he okay?" This must have scared him. "He's fine," Diarra smiled weakly. "He sat here the whole time until we sent him home to sleep." He's very attached to you, Mom." There was no usual irritation in her voice, only fatigue and something else. Perhaps realization. "I'm sorry I made you worry," I said, trying to sit up. "Don't be silly," Diarra helped me. "It's not your fault. I should be the one apologizing." I looked at her in surprise. Diarra rarely admitted mistakes. "For what?" She lowered her eyes. For everything. For not standing up for you at Finley's birthday. For letting Gareth's mother humiliate you all these years. For not appreciating everything you did for us. For trying to sell your house without asking you. Her voice trembled, and tears rolled down her cheeks. My proud, always composed daughter was crying. When the doctor said you might not make it, I suddenly realized how much I hadn't told you, she continued. How many years were lost because of my stupid pride and desire to live up to other people's expectations. Deara, I reached out and touched her face. I always knew you loved me, even when we didn't understand each other. But I behaved terribly, she shook her head. I became what I always feared I would become, a cold, calculating woman who values status more than family. You just wanted the best for your son, I tried to comfort her. Like all mothers do, but I didn't see what was really best for him, Deara smiled bitterly. I didn't notice how unhappy he was trying to live up to our expectations. It took him running away from home, and you ending up in the hospital for me to finally see the light. We talked for a long time. For the first time in years, we really talked, openly and honestly. About her childhood, Edward's death, her desire to escape the working class, my disappointment when she turned her back on everything we taught her, about Finley and his talents, about Gareth and his family, about plans for the future. I talked to Gareth about the house, Deara said as our conversation drew to a close. We've decided not to sell it. It's your house, Mom, and it will always be yours unless you decide otherwise. I felt a heavy weight lift. Thank you, Deara. That means a lot to me. And one more thing, she hesitated. Finley wants to join a robotics club. Gareth and I have decided to support him, and maybe you could go with him sometimes. Share your experience. I couldn't believe my ears. Of course, I'd love to, but what would Lorraine say? Deara scoffed. Lorraine will have to accept it. Gareth, he's been rethinking a lot of things. He saw how worried Finley was about you, how he wouldn't leave your bedside. It made him think about family values, about what's really important. A soft knock, and Finley appeared. Seeing me awake, he rushed to the bed. Grandma, you're awake. I smiled, my heart warming with his sincere joy. Thanks to you, as I heard. You're my hero, Finley. He blushed. I just did what had to be done. I called an ambulance like you taught me to do in case of an emergency. And saved my life. I took his hand. Thank you. I was so scared, he admitted quietly. When you fell, I thought, it's okay, I reassured him. I'm fine. And I'll be even better once we finish your grandfather's watch. His face lit up. I've almost finished cleaning it, just like you showed me. It'll be working again soon. A week later, I was discharged. Gareth picked me up himself, unusually attentive and caring. A specially prepared room awaited me on the ground floor of Deara's house, so I wouldn't have to climb stairs. The first few days were difficult. I felt weak, tired quickly, my heart sometimes made itself known. But gradually, it became easier. I started helping with simple chores, cooking Finley's favorite meals, spending time with him, reading, looking at drawings. One evening, as Finley and I worked on a new project, an automatic watering system for houseplants, Gareth walked in. He stopped, watching us with an unfamiliar expression. What are you doing? He asked, coming closer. Finley tensed, ready to defend our activity, but Gareth smiled. That looks interesting. Can I take a look? Finley and I exchanged glances, surprised. Gareth had never shown interest in his son's technical projects before. Sure, Dad, Finley said, making room. We're designing a system that will automatically water Mom's flowers when the soil gets too dry. How does it work? Gareth sat beside them, looking at the diagram with genuine curiosity. Finley began to explain, and I was surprised to see Gareth actually listening. He wasn't pretending. He asked questions, got involved, offered ideas. You know, he said when Finley finished, when I was about your age, I was also interested in electronics. Really? Finley couldn't hide his surprise. Yes. Gareth smiled at the memory. I used to build radios from parts one found at the dump. My mother was horrified. She thought it was an inappropriate pastime for a boy from a good family. Grandma Lorraine? Finley raised his eyebrows. But why didn't you ever tell me? Gareth sighed. Probably because at some point, I believed her. I believed I had to live up to a certain image, and I decided my childhood hobbies were just a whim. But looking at you, at your passion, I'm starting to think maybe I gave up something I really loved. Gareth's candor was a turning point. From that evening, he spent more time with his son, taking interest, even helping with technical solutions. They found a common language, hidden for years. Diarra also changed. She became softer, more tolerant, and began listening to her son's wishes, not just her mother-in-law's advice. We often talked in the evenings, reminiscing, discussing the present, planning the future. Slowly, the connection I had considered lost was being restored. 2 weeks after my discharge, something I had both feared and anticipated happened: Lorraine's visit. She arrived unannounced, elegant as always, hair perfect, expensive suit. "Judith," she nodded with cool politeness. "I'm glad to see you're better." "Thank you, Lorraine," I replied just as reservedly. We sat in the living room, me, Diarra, and Lorraine. Gareth was at work, Finley still at school. The tension was palpable. "I hear you've given up on selling the house, Judith," Lorraine finally said, turning to Diarra. "And that Finley is now into some kind of technology." "Yes, Mom," Diarra replied calmly. "We decided it was the right thing to do. The house means a lot to Mom, and robotics is Finley's real passion." Lorraine pursed her lips. "I'm afraid you're making a mistake, Diarra. Technical hobbies won't lead a boy to the success the member of the Simmons family deserves. And as for the house, that's an emotional decision, not a rational one." Perhaps Diarra met her mother-in-law's gaze without fear. "But it's our decision, mine, Gareth's, and Finley's. We are a family, and we have decided that happiness and genuine relationships are more important to us than living up to someone else's expectations." Lorraine looked stunned. She wasn't used to resistance, especially from a daughter-in-law who had spent years trying to earn her approval. "Does Gareth know about this?" she asked after a pause. "Of course," Diarra nodded. "It was our decision. In fact, he's helping Finley with his new project, a robot for the school fair." Lorraine shifted her gaze to me, and I saw a mixture of irritation and reluctant respect in her eyes. "I see you got what you wanted, Judith. You won them over to your side." "I didn't win anyone over, Lorraine," I met her gaze calmly. "I just loved my family the way they are, not the way someone else thinks they should be." At that moment, the front door opened, and Finley burst in, excited. "Mom, Grandma, I made the city robotics team. We're going to compete in the national competition." He froze when he saw Lorraine, his enthusiasm dimming. "Hello, Grandma Lorraine." "Hello, Finley," she smiled stiffly. "Congratulations on your success." "Thanks," he said, looking from face to face, feeling the tension. "I think I'll go change." "Wait." Diarra stood and hugged her son. "That's wonderful news. We have to celebrate. How about inviting everyone over for dinner, including Grandma Judith and Grandma Lorraine?" I couldn't hide my surprise. Diarra was suggesting a family dinner with both grandmothers. "Great idea." Finley chimed in unexpectedly. "Dad's coming home early today. We can order pizza, or I can help Grandma Judith make her famous spaghetti and meatballs." Lorraine looked as if she had been invited to her own funeral, but she couldn't refuse in front of her grandson. "I'd love to join you," she finally said. The evening promised to be interesting. Dinner went better than I expected. The spaghetti Finley and I made was delicious. When Gareth came home and heard about his son's achievement, he was genuinely proud. He even told us about his own youthful experiments with electronics, which clearly shocked his mother. "You never told me you used to build radios," Lorraine said, looking offended. "You never asked, Mom," Gareth replied simply. "You always knew exactly what I should be interested in, so there was no point in telling you about things that didn't fit into your plans." Lorraine was silent, digesting his words. For the first time, I saw uncertainty, even vulnerability, on her face. After dinner, while Finley showed his father his drawings and Diarra made coffee, Lorraine and I were alone in the living room. "You know," she said suddenly, looking at the family photos. "I've always done what I thought was best for my family, for Gareth, for Finley." "Me, too," I replied. "We're alike in that way." Strange as it may sound. She looked at me in surprise. "Maybe, but your approach seems to work better." They seem happy real, because they can be themselves. I shrugged, without having to live up to anyone else's expectations. Lorraine nodded thoughtfully. Maybe there's something to that, although it's hard for me to imagine any other way than the one I've been on my whole life. It's never too late to try, I smiled. You can start small. For example, ask your grandson what really interests him. She paused, then nodded. I'll think about it. It wasn't an apology, not an admission of mistakes, but it was a small step towards understanding, towards the possibility of building a relationship on a new foundation. By December, I had fully recovered and returned to my home. But now it wasn't as lonely as it used to be. Finley came by regularly, not only for technical projects, but just to talk, listen to stories about his grandfather, and share his thoughts and plans. Sometimes Gareth came with him, and the three of us spent evenings repairing old mechanisms or designing new devices. Diarra also came by more often, helping with cleaning, bringing groceries, or just sitting with me over tea. We were rebuilding our lost connection, learning to know each other again. Sometimes we argued, sometimes we disagreed, but now there was mutual respect between us, which had been missing for so long. On Christmas Eve, Finley brought me a small box, neatly wrapped in blue paper. "This is for you, Grandma," he said shyly. "I wanted to give it to you earlier, but it wasn't ready." I opened the box and froze in amazement. Inside was a miniature mechanical alarm clock, a true work of art. The brass case was polished to a shine, and behind the glass, I could see a complex mechanism with tiny gears and springs. But the most amazing thing was the dial. It was engraved with our family silhouettes, me, Diarra, Gareth, and Finley himself, connected by thin lines like a constellation. "Finley, I couldn't find the words. It's beautiful. Did you make it yourself?" "Dad and I have been working on it for the last few weeks," he smiled. "I designed the mechanism, inspired by Grandpa's watch, and Dad helped me with the engraving. It's not just an alarm clock. It's programmed to ring on dates that are special to our family." I carefully wound the mechanism, and the alarm clock came to life in my hands. A quiet, steady ticking, the hands moving across the dial. Time that now united our family. "It's beautiful," I hugged my grandson. "Thank you, Finley. It's the best gift I've ever received." "Now you have something to remind you of all of us," he said, looking at the alarm clock. "Of our family, which is whole again." That evening, we all gathered together. Me, Diarra, Gareth, Finley, and, to my surprise, Lorraine. Not a perfect family from a glossy magazine, but real people with their strengths and weaknesses, their history and their scars. But for the first time in a long time, we were honest with each other and accepted each other for who we were. When Finley proposed a toast to family, I looked at Edward's pocket watch, now worn by his grandson, and at the alarm clock he had given me, standing on the mantelpiece. Two mechanisms measuring time in their own way, but linked by a common history, common efforts, and love. Like our family, for many years, it lacked sincerity, acceptance, and true love. But now the mechanism had been restored. All the parts were in place, and time was running correctly again. I raised my glass with everyone else, feeling a warmth spreading through my chest that had nothing to do with a heart attack. It was a feeling of home, of belonging, of love. The clock of my life was ticking again, measuring not just days and hours, but moments of true happiness.